Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Mom Strength. I'm Sophia Beach. I'm your host, and I'm so excited to have today's guest on. So I'm I'm just going through puberty right now, but I met Sophia, I think it was in September, August, a couple months ago. It's October now, at a Sean Paul concert. My friend Marina was going with her friends, and I was like, dude, like I love Sean Paul. Like this is awesome. I've never seen Sean Paul. So I joined them and we met up for a couple drinks and then we went out dancing. And I was like, I love this person. But then a few weeks later, a few months later, time is not clear to me right now, but I saw Sophia share this. I saw Rena and Sophia share this thing called Talk for Steps of Pride 2022 by the Get Real movement. And it was a talk about Sophia and her parenting journey, about her parenting experience as a queer non-binary person. And I was like, I learned so much from it, and we all need to hear this because we all need to learn about this. So we can not only do better for ourselves, but also for our kids and everyone in this world around us. So welcome, Sophia. I'm so happy to have you on here.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you for listening to that keynote. I really appreciate it, and that you invited me here to just talk more. I love it. Any opportunity to talk about myself, I'll take it.
we're the same. This conversation will be like 4 hours long. Okay, so I'm gonna actually do an official intro
Okay.
so people kind of have a background of who you are. So Sophia, I didn't ask you this. How do you say your last name?
Dhrolia.
Dhrolia. Okay, Sophia Dhrolia is a non-binary parent to two who struggled with infertility for years and advocates where possible for a more inclusive fertility process and inclusive language and experiences for kids growing up with different families. Professionally, they are diversity, equity, and inclusion specialist who focuses on helping organizations create cultures of belonging to ensure people are seen, heard, valued, and given equitable opportunities to thrive. I love this.
It's a
Um,
mouthful. It's a
I,
mouthful.
I, but I love this. Like, I feel like the world needs more you. One of the things that actually talking about belonging, it's one of those things that we all innately search for. We all want to belong. And we think we're looking for happiness. We think we're looking for love, and we need love, but it's truly what we want is to feel like we belong. And I love that you are working with organizations to help create this culture. We need that. So
It's a lot of hard work though. Like in terms of there's just so much resistance, and it's funny, you say that because it is an innate feeling of belonging. But the problem is there's a cool kids club, and then there's
mm,
everyone else, and it's like, but we already belong and we
yes.
already feel good versus the rest of us. We're like, but hold on, we want to be at the cool kids table too.
Mhm.
And it's just about making room at that table, making the table bigger, just breaking that table and creating a bigger one, right?
And that's, I think the issue is when you don't see things as a problem, it's not because they're not a problem. It's just because they may not affect you or
Yeah.
impact you in the same way. And I think we need to, get our heads out of our asses long enough so we can learn to see things from other people's point of view. And I always say, like, you don't have to understand everything about someone, but you can still accept and listen and learn.
It's
Um,
empathy,
it's
right? It's
empathy.
all about empathy. And you would think it would be just more common practice to have empathy, but it's really not, because there's just so much selfishness. And I think the pandemic highlighted a lot of that too, right? It was like you were either empathetic or you're a selfish asshole. It's like there was no in between. It was
It's
just
so
kind of
true.
one or the two. Yeah.
And I think that the hard part is too that so many people weren't parented with compassion.
Hmm.
And then there's one of two things that can happen. You can grow up and be like, I didn't like that, I'm changing. Or you
Yeah.
can be like, oh, that's just normal, I'm just going to
Yeah.
continue this path. And I feel like that's what I see a lot too, is I'm like, I do have empathy for certain people because I'm like, you had it hard, but that doesn't give you permission to then like put that same stress and trauma on everybody else around you because you haven't dealt with your own stuff, right?
Exactly.
And we see that in workplaces. You probably see it all the time, is like,
All the time.
dude, like this is more than just like a presentation. This is more about like life's work, and like changing perspectives is hard work. So kudos to you for doing it.
Thank
Thank you for
you.
doing it. And I want to hear about, so let's start with who you are and kind of how you got into, I want to know about how you met your wife, actually.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So my wife and I, we've officially been married for 10 years. And
Congrats.
thank you. So we we actually, okay, so this is a great story. I'll keep it quick, but so I actually live, so I'm totally as, queer as can be, as gay as can be, but my entire life and everyone around me as straight as can be. So I've
Mm.
always lived a very straight life, but very openly who I am. And so I was on at the time, and I don't even know if this website exists, is Plenty of Fish.
I've
And
heard, yeah, I remember that
yeah.
one. Yeah.
And so this was like, I don't know, 12 years ago. I was on the site and I created a profile to find lesbian friends. I was in a relationship and I was just looking for friends. And so my wife, Tamara, now my wife, she reached out to me and she's like, hey, I think we'd, really would get along. It seems like we have a lot of common interests. And I was in a relationship at the time. So I wrote back and I was like, yeah, seems great, but I'm in a relationship right now and I'm just looking for friends. Dead silence. I didn't hear from her at all. She was like, who the hell goes on here looking for friends?
I was gonna say, I feel like what I remember from people who were on Plenty of Fish was very much not a friend zone thing. So you were like, you know what? I'm starting this up. So what happened after that?
I did meet some people that
Oh, did
didn't end
you?
up becoming friends, but we tried golfing with someone, but yeah. Anyway, so 6 months went by. It was a toxic relationship. I got out of it, bought a house, got my life together, and then I went back on Plenty of Fish. I was like, all right, I'm ready to date. And I was just planning to date. I was planning to date lots of women. I had this house in the beaches. I was excited, gonna, just have fun.
Live it up. Yeah.
And totally. And then I go on, I see her little photo there. I was like, you know what? I'm going to try messaging her. She's hot. I'm going to try. So I messaged and I said, hey, I've sorted my life out. Let's get together. She wrote back, surprisingly, 6 months later, because I said, I don't know what your status is. Wrote back and she said, yeah, let's meet. It was May long weekend. So we met on May 23rd on Church Street in Toronto. And I looked at her and I literally said to myself, this is the person I'm going to marry. And
Holy crap.
we had an amazing conversation. We had some drinks. Then I walked her to her car and she said, it was Inside Out Festival, which is, like TIFF, but, it's the LGBTQ2S community and their films. And so she's like, I'm going tonight. If we can find tickets, do you want to join us? And it was her and her two friends. And I was like, yeah, sure. And she really wanted her friends to just get to basically approve of me, right?
Yeah.
And so I showed up, had a great time with them. And then a month later, she moved in. 3 months later, I proposed while we were on a trip in Newfoundland. And then a year to the date, on the day we met, we got married.
That is incredible. I feel
Yeah.
like that's like, I'm like, it's like a Bollywood romance story right now.
Right. And that's, I mean, I grew up watching Bollywood, so I think I was just trying to find my Bollywood hero.
And you know what? I love that. My husband and I met on May 23rd too,
Oh.
which is the May long weekend. And my daughter was born on May long weekend too. She's on the
Hmm.
21st. But yeah, we met for the first time at a rock climbing, like outdoor rock climbing camping weekend. And I was actually casually seeing someone at the time and I saw him. I'm like, I really like this guy. You know what it was for me? It's so funny how it's subtle things. Like you were like, I love that we could have a conversation. And it sounded like it felt very natural for you. It was the same for me. It just felt
Yeah.
easy.
Yeah.
Right. And we're so used to dating being hard. We're
Yeah,
like,
absolutely. But it
so
was, what it was for me? It was her smile. And her smile still kills me every single time. Yeah, she has the best smile. And I always say I'm a lucky, lucky human being. Like the universe has been good to me.
I love that. And I'm sure she says the same about you.
Well, questionable.
Okay. So you have been married for 10 years
Hmm.
and you have two kids.
We do,
How
yes.
old are your kids?
Yeah, so our oldest he'll be 8 in January, and youngest just turned 3 in September.
Nice.
Yeah, not an intentional age gap. We can talk through that, but
Yeah.
we were really hoping that they would be very close in age.
Yeah.
So my wife gave birth to our first, and I was hoping to go through it very quickly because I was younger and I was like, yeah, I got this. I'm going to do this. And I started trying when he was, I think, 9 months old.
Okay.
So we were hoping for like a 2 year age gap at max, like, thinking, yeah, it'll take a bit of time, but yeah, not the 4 or 5 year gap that I think it's 4.5 years between them.
And so, can you tell me about both of your experiences with getting pregnant, with having a family?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And so I will say I'm answering these questions because it's on a podcast. But if you do look at my keynote, one of the things I say is Google these questions before you ask people.
Yeah.
Mostly because, and it's not unique to just my experience. It's a lot of people who are trying to have babies. They have different experiences, right? And it's recognizing if you know a little bit about them, you could probably arm yourself with some more information before you
Yeah.
go. Um, go right at them because there's a lot of vulnerability involved in
And
in in the process, right?
and the one thing that stuck out to me is that people assume that everyone assumes that this is how you get pregnant, this is how you meet someone, this is how a relationship goes. But more and more, what I see anyways with the clients that I work with, there
Yeah.
is no normal. Everyone is
No.
I don't even think that your experience is different. I just think that we are all different. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
going in with the assumption that this is how you get pregnant is just not it's not right. So,
Yeah.
thank you for bringing that up, and thank you for sharing this with us because it's true. People could Google a lot of things. There's answers to everything online.
It's true. It's true. Yeah. So so we decided that my wife would go first. So we decided Tamara would go first, and that was primarily due to age. I'm totally outing that she's older. Sorry, babe. And so we were like, yeah, okay, you go first, because we were cognizant that the process could take long because we had some friends who had gone through it, and it took 6 to 8 months to get pregnant. So we were like, okay. And what that means, though, that 6 to 8 months is that you spend weeks doing blood work every morning at 7 a.m. And then well, no, actually, before all of this, we had to first pick a sperm donor, right? And that process is super easy if you're looking for a Caucasian, blonde, blue eyes, tons of options, tons of options. Now, what we wanted was to find someone who looked like me. Now, I'm South Asian. I have, curly, dark hair. I'm very hairy.
Me
And
too.
right, we're just blessed with it.
Yeah.
I am lighter skin tone, and so these are the sort of things we're like the criteria we're going with in this search. So basically, you can search online for if you want an unknown donor, in the sense of it's not someone you know.
Yeah.
And so that's a process we chose. And so we went online, and basically you're shopping for the sperm to make your future children. And so luckily, it actually didn't take us long at all because we were so specific. This guy existed, and I can't tell you how thankful I am for this man to donate his raw materials for us to have a family. Like I am so thankful for him to do that. I don't know his reasonings for doing it. Could have just been cash, because in the US you get money for donating, but essentially we found a guy who looked a lot like me, and had really has thick curly hair, and we looked at him and we're like, he's perfect. And so we just bought a ton of sperm. And so I think we bought like 6 vials, and you're looking at like $1,500 a pop, right?
Wow.
Yeah, it's not cheap. It's not cheap because there's so many, like the person who donates gets money, but then the clinic gets money. Like
Organizations.
there's
Yeah.
just all
Yeah.
this is all privately funded, right? So it's tons of money. And then when you go to retrieve the sperm from the sperm bank, you got to pay. You got to pay the shipping. And then you got to pay for every time you try and inseminate. So what we did was, it was called intrauterine insemination. So it's IUI for short. And so Tamara went through 6 of those. And so essentially what that is you go in the clinic, it's all very, very timed. So, you're getting your blood work done. As soon as your blood work is showing that you're ovulating, then they call you in the following day to inseminate you with the hopes that, you know, your eggs are out at a good time. There's like, I think, a 3 to 5 day window for your eggs to be there and for the sperm to meet, and you're really hoping for them to love each other enough to make this baby, and make it successfully. So for her, it took 6 tries, took some breaks in between. And then, you know, finally it was Mother's Day. And it was the day before. I remember I ran my first sporting life marathon, the 10K. And I was like, you know, and I believe in spirituality and God and whatnot. I remember running and I was just thinking, like, looking up to the sky, and I was like, please let this be the one, let this be the one. And the next day I came home. Tamara had gone for her blood work, got the call, and she had this little setup of baby PJs on the
Oh
table
my
to
gosh.
say it worked. And we were just ecstatic. It was like, it was incredible. um you know, and her pregnancy was relatively smooth. It was easy. I think for her, for me, I really started questioning where I belonged in this, because you know, we used, you know, it was her eggs, donor sperm, and then me as this other parent. And so I was like, well, where do I fit in this process? Like, will this kid even love me? Will they even recognize me as a parent? All these thoughts where I'm like, you know, do I even belong in this process? um but you know what, even I'll have to say, even through the fertility clinics, there were so many times where I was ignored as the partner. I was told to wait while she went in for stuff, and I was like, no, like, I'm her partner, I'm part of this, like. And so, you know, I was allowed to then come in, but I had to advocate for that, which was annoying, versus just seen as part of this process. Because when you had, you know, heterosexual couples there, they took them in together. There was no stopping. Like, no, I'm not her sister, I'm her partner, like, we are doing this together. um and so I think that was contributing to a lot of what I was feeling when she finally did get pregnant. And then, you know, all the changes were happening to her body. This baby was feeling very real for her. And in that process, I had decided I really wanted to experience pregnancy, mostly because I kept asking her, what does it feel like to be pregnant? Like, what does it feel like when this baby's moving and kicking? And she was just like, I don't know.
Well, it's so hard to describe to someone who has not been pregnant.
Yeah, that's what she
It's
said, right? She's like,
yeah.
I don't know how to tell, I don't know. And I kept asking, and she just couldn't. And I was just fascinated with the science of it. I was like, this is miraculous. The
It
fact that
is.
you do this in a clinic, in any setting, you're just combining sperm and eggs, however you do, and then it becomes this baby that's moving inside of you, and then you give birth to this baby, right? I mean, I've always called it a parasite because it's totally living.
Oh, it 100% leaches everything out of you, really.
Right?
And these
Yeah.
still are parasites, right?
Yeah.
So, like, children are innately selfish, right? They like want everything for themselves. So
Yeah.
and you know, when you were sharing that, I really feel that we don't treat pregnant people like families. We just treat them like as them, like they're doing
Yes.
the work, right? Which is true, but also they can't do it alone. They are supported by their partners. And so not being able to recognize you as, you know, somebody who needs to be in the room, like that would have felt really that would have felt really hard.
Yeah.
And
It felt like shit. It felt
what
like
year
shit.
was this? Because this was 8 years, 9 years ago.
It was in 2014.
So you can tell that it wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
Like, you
No.
know, this is not like 1960s where you're like, okay, like this is not and this is in Toronto, which is a big city.
It is, and a very well, you know, known fertility clinic. Amazing doctor. Like, the doctor was great. It was the other staff that weren't necessarily always, you know, up to par of who I was in this journey.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you forgive so much along the way, but along the way, you know, my self-esteem becomes
Yes.
damaged, right?
Yeah.
My, like, where do I fit in becomes, you know. And then of course we're celebrating, we're happy, and everyone's so excited, but it's all happening to her.
Yeah.
And it's like, and then I would hear things like, you know, oh, well, how did you pick the dad? And then it was like, in the beginning I would just be so angry, and I would just, it's not dad, it's donor.
I was gonna
Like,
say it's not the dad. The dad's not showing up, right? It's
no,
just the yeah.
it's just the raw materials. But it took a lot out of me, that first round. in terms of the first round of when she was successfully pregnant, the constant, like, people would say, dad, dad, dad. And I was like, no, it's donor. But, looking back, I have to also recognize this is completely new to everybody else around us, right? Like they hadn't experienced anything like this and they didn't know the language to use. Can I say that they don't use it anymore? Absolutely, right? They're incredible with that. And I mean, our kids are incredible. If anyone ever uses that, they'll say donor. Mind you, my 3-year-old is a little shit. I don't know if swearing
Second
is
child.
allowed, but she constantly will be like, your dad. And I'm like, no, I'm not your dad. But she does it on purpose because she knows it
She knows
aroused
it
her.
bothers you.
Oh yeah. Um,
The second
so yeah,
children,
that
I
was our
tell you, they're
oh
just,
my goodness.
yeah.
Oh yeah. So that was our first sort of experience with our first. He was born in 2015. Do you want me to go into the second, or you have questions about that one?
How was it your first is a he, or what gender
Yeah.
pronouns do you? Okay.
Yeah, he's he, him. Yeah.
How did you feel once he was born? Did you
Oh,
feel
it
still
was
kind
it
of
was
like you weren't part of it, or?
no, it was, when they talk, like when there's a term love at first sight, I did feel it with Tamara, yes. But when I saw him, so she ended up having a C-section. And you know what, the C-section process, I don't think people can appreciate what the partner feels like when they watch and especially if it wasn't an emergency, but it needed to be done because this baby wasn't coming out any other way. Like I was terrified. I had to keep asking my midwife that she would be okay. Like she's gonna be okay, right? Because, and in context, where my fear is coming from is that my mom had a C-section with both of us, my brother and myself. But in her second one, she lost so much blood that they had to give her blood transfusions, but then they gave her tainted blood, because there was the tainted blood scandal back in the 80s in Toronto, um, and the tainted blood had AIDS or hepatitis. And so she ended up getting hepatitis C through that. So there was just so
Gosh.
much fear about, potentially losing her, something's going to happen. And yeah, so we, go through all that. And then he was born, and it was just like, holy, we have a baby. And he was just this little angel, like just it was amazing. It was just incredible. I didn't want to sleep. I just wanted to hold him all the time. Like he just felt so real. And I think what was amazing is that everyone who came to visit the hospital, because my wife has a huge family, they were like, but he looks like you.
You're like, yes.
Exactly. I can't tell you how ecstatic I was. And people were, the looks on their faces, they were so confused. Like I can't, it was the
They're like,
best because
what did you do here to make
honestly,
this
they just
happen?
couldn't understand how she gave birth and he looked like me. And like no one could comprehend it. I couldn't see it at the time. Um, and it was just, but it's just, I feel like it's just nature's way, right? Like it's just the way of doing it. And it's, I mean, like when people have dogs, their dogs end up looking like them too,
It's
right?
true.
So I
Yeah.
think it's
Everyone,
just
it just
something
ends up
about,
kind of looking similar.
yeah.
I
Um,
agree.
so I think that was really remarkable for me to hear that he looked like me. And I didn't question whether I belonged because I knew my responsibility to this kid. I knew it the moment she got pregnant, but I also knew the moment I held him,
Yeah.
and I was the first one to hold him post medical because she had the C-section. It was just like the most incredible thing. I'm like, this is mine, this is ours, and he is our responsibility. And yeah, no, I haven't looked back since.
I'm really glad to hear that. I think that is something I think my partner can probably resonate with too, though it was his sperm.
Yeah.
It's they don't this is what I felt as a pregnant person during my first pregnancy. I was like, every second of my life, every second of my day, I'm thinking about this baby.
Yeah.
But husband was going to work, not thinking about the baby. Like,
Yeah,
because it was happening to my body. I was at work with my clients, but somewhere I was also thinking about the baby
absolutely.
nonstop. And you can't not do that. And so it becomes very real for the pregnant person very fast. And I can see how the other person, the partner, would feel like, okay, where do I play a role in all this?
Yeah, yeah.
And that's something that I've never talked about on this podcast. So thank you for bringing that up. Now, I want to hear about your own experience with fertility and pregnancy, and because you mentioned that you were hoping to have your children closer together.
Mhm.
And so you started trying kind of 9 months when your son was 9 months.
When he was 9 months old, because we
Yeah.
thought, okay, we knew it took 6 months for him, and here I was so confident. I was 33 at the time. I'm proud and 40 now. But I was 33, super excited, and I was like, I got this. I'm young, I'm in good health, and this is going to happen. My eggs are great. They're amazing. There's no question about them. And we got this. Lo and behold, I learned my eggs likely really, really detest sperm because every attempt just did not work. So, what's really nice that in Canada, and now I don't know if this still exists, but I think it does, is that back in um I can't even tell you what year, but it wasn't that long ago. In the last 10 years, in the last decade, the government, through the advocacy of many, many people, who work in the fertility process and have dealt with infertility, advocated for funding. And so, what the government agreed upon was your first IVF cycle. So, that's in vitro fertilization, or ICSI, which is similar. I can talk through that in a bit. It would be funded. And so what you're looking at is all the fees, all the practitioner fees would be funded. So that's about $10,000 to $12,000 that you don't have to think about out of pocket. What you do have to think about out of pocket are the medication costs. Okay, so I went through 3 IUI cycles. So just let's put the sperm in. So lots of blood work, 7 a.m. Let's find out when you're ovulating. And I was so annoyed because I would always feel like they're not getting it on time, or that they should do this, they should do that. Like I'm the doctor, right? Like it's similar during the pandemic. Everyone became an immunologist, right? And so, I thought I knew more. I didn't. They were doing the best they could, but there's so much emotion. There's so much emotion. And then I did an IVF cycle early on. So it was my fourth try, because we're like, okay, we're eligible for the funding. Let's go and do
Let's
it.
use it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this was just after he turned 1. I was eligible for the funding cycle. And so we went through it, and I ended up with nothing. There were 9 eggs extracted, two, and then they were all inseminated, and 2 of them were kind of still going at it at day 4 when I went in. And they don't tell you all this. So they tell you at day 3 so basically they're expecting it to turn to a blastocyst that they can then that they can transfer into your uterus. So they only tell you up to day 3. So when you go in day 5, you have no idea if there's anything left. They don't tell you, or at least this clinic didn't. And so we went in day 5, and for the transfer, and I'm so excited. And they were like, yeah, one of them didn't really make it, and the one that we're going to try looks like it might not make it. So we're just going to go for it. So I go in with that. We try it. Unfortunately, that cycle didn't work. And then I decided I needed to switch clinics, because during that clinic process, there were so many things that were happening. Like I was asked for my partner to come and bring his sperm, and like I just wasn't seen as who I was. Like I was
Yeah.
just seen as a number and part of the heterosexist system,
Yeah.
and it was exhausting. And mind you, it wasn't a long, lengthy process yet. I was only 4 tries in, essentially, but I thought
That's
for sure.
still, I feel like that's still a long time, in the sense of, like, anyone who's tried for a pregnancy of any kind and
Yeah.
knows each month how disappointing it is when you don't
Absolutely. Right.
don't have the
And
baby. Yeah.
I think what people don't understand in that is it's not tangible loss for like that you can describe, because like I can't, there's nothing I've lost, but there is something I've lost, because I've lost that hope.
Hope.
right?
Yeah.
Because each month that you're ovulating, there's that, and you're trying, there's that hope. And that hope to create this child, to create the family, you've already created it all in your mind. And then it's sorry, no, it didn't work this month. And so but I think the IVF was what really, really set me back, because I thought, of course, an IVF would work, because I'm not coming in to the fertility process with any known issues,
Right.
right? Because typically,
You're healthy.
okay,
Everything else is, yeah.
exactly, like we're only here because we have to be here, because we don't have an alternative way to create children.
Yeah.
So we're here not because of the medical route, but because of like necessary, we needed it. And so in my mind, I was like, well, there's medically, it seems like everything is fine, so this should work. And I was led to believe it should work because on paper everything looked great. So it was a really big blow to my self-esteem, a big blow to I just felt like I was a failure, and that feeling lasted for many years, because every month we switched clinics, and again, and I think in total I tried 11, no, I think 13 IUIs.
Wow.
Um, and
Wow.
yeah, and then we then said, and we switched donors as well, because we thought, let's go find someone who looks like my wife. We found someone. He was super cute, not as tall as we would have wanted, but we're like, and it's funny, right? Because we had no idea. We're like, okay, what does 5'10" actually look like? So we went around to all the men in our lives. We're like, how tall are you? How tall are you? And we'd be like, one guy was like 5'10". We're like, okay, all right, that's acceptable. Right? Because like we're just I mean, that's, I guess that's a nice thing, in that we do get to shop around much more than for if you're with one single life partner
Yeah.
that you want to make children with.
Yeah.
And so, we tried with a different donor. And then at the same time, we both came back to each other and said, let's go back to the original donor. We know it's worked, so let's go back. We tried unsuccessfully many, many times. And then we applied for my wife to get IVF funding, because she had never gone through IVF. And we just said, okay, you know what? Let's just switch back to you. It's too exhausting. And I think the hardest part, and I think anyone who's dealt with fertility who has a partner, is that the partners just don't get it as intimately as what you're going through. Like they don't understand, because like I said earlier, the loss is not tangible. But I'm not saying that the loss is not real for them either. And I think I didn't appreciate that each time, because I knew for her, she saw the hurt, right? She saw the pain. And it's also, she's going through the same too, in a different way. But I was just so self-absorbed in why it's not happening to me and my body's a failure, that I didn't even acknowledge that, she's probably processing loss at the same time. But she was wonderful in that, of course, she's the best and doesn't, never centers herself. And so she didn't, right? It was all about me and me going through this. But then at the end, we're like, okay, you know what? It's worked with you. So just you go through it, because there's just no point anymore. And I'm done. I have to give up. In that process, I gave up sugar for 2 years. Like I did everything possible to think this is how my body would get better to have babies. And it's not that. So anyone who's trying to restrict food because you think it's going to help you have a baby, I can tell you it may not. It may not. So eat that burger, eat that cake, eat whatever you want, because
Yeah.
honestly, you need to give yourself comfort and compassion going through this. And that's one thing I didn't do. I was not compassionate with myself going through the process.
I obviously I don't have that experience that you have. Um, but I work with a lot of people who've had difficulty with fertility. And I really don't think that anyone who hasn't had that experience will understand. But what I see is that we all need to be more compassionate with people who may or may not be going through this, because when you ask a family, oh, when are you having a child, or when are you having your next one, you have no idea what they're going through.
Absolutely.
And first of all, it's none of our business, but also sometimes it's from people who are our family members who truly care about us. So they're not saying it with, in a, to be mean, they just truly care. But also doesn't mean you're ready to share what you're going through with everyone around you either, because
Yeah,
it's such a deeply
absolutely.
personal issue.
Yeah.
Um,
But it's also back to like these assumptions that, you got to get married, you got to buy a
Yes.
house, you got to have kids, you got to then put the kids in university. No, you got to breastfeed or chest feed. You got to, and then if you do that past a year, oh my God, something's wrong with you. Like there's just all these expectations of when things should happen. And people have to recognize that, like, not everybody wants kids. And you know what? That's okay. And that's even better. The people who recognize that they don't want kids, I appreciate them so deeply because they would end up being awful parents
Yeah,
because they
I
don't want
agree.
to be parents,
Yeah.
right? And I think our parents' generations and those, before them didn't have those types of choices.
No.
They were just held to those expectations. And so it's the same thing, right? That generation of parents are expecting their children to have children, and it's this whole like, as soon as you get, okay, when are the babies coming? And it's like, but you have no idea what we're going through. And sometimes, I have family members who have been trying for years, and it's like it's something that is so you're so vulnerable, and as a person going through it, you just feel like a failure, and now it's just being highlighted by your family members because you still don't have these said children that that the expecting grandparents are waiting for. And so it's such an awful process. So for me, my recommendation is really just to get to know people, have conversations with them, and let them share the information if they want to. But
When
if
they're
they
ready.
don't,
Yeah.
yeah, when they're ready. If they don't want to, don't ask them when they're having kids. Like, if they want to have kids, they'll ask you about things or they'll share information, but otherwise it's frankly no one's business.
No. No.
Yeah.
And my brother's 42 and he doesn't have kids and he's like not partnered. And when I was probably 10 years younger, we would harass him. When are you going to get married? And
Yeah.
now I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy's so wise. Like he's truly so wise because he knows he would not, he doesn't want kids. He wouldn't make, he wouldn't make a good parent.
Yeah.
And he knows that. And I like you, I truly respect people who maybe they would make great parents, but they don't want kids. And I respect that decision so much. Our parents didn't have that choice. Like you said, they
Mhm.
were forced into that very limited, narrow view of what is acceptable.
Mhm.
And frankly speaking, I often think my dad should never have had kids, knowing who he is, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm here, but like at the same time, I can recognize that so many people of that generation would have been better off not having kids because
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was deeply traumatizing to them.
Well, and even I think for my mom, her deep sadness, and when I came out to her, back when I was a teenager, her greatest sadness was her fear that I would not have kids.
Oh,
That was her, that I wouldn't live a quote unquote normal life because I wouldn't have kids. And yeah, that was one of her greatest concerns, right? Like that it wasn't going to happen for me. And it was like, well, it happened. It just happened in a different way. And she's great with them now, but I think, for her it was a very long process of, how do I process this information? I'm not, she has 3 grandkids from my brother, but she didn't think she would ever get them from me.
and I'm glad she did. I'm
Yeah.
glad you did too. So when you finally did get pregnant,
Hmm.
how did you feel? Was it the
Yeah.
exciting pregnancy, excited feelings that you had, that you had
Yeah. So, well,
anticipated?
I'll go back to, so we had decided with Tamara doing it, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so we decided she would go through the process. And so she went through the egg retrieval process. And we were told, her numbers are great on paper. It's going to be amazing. She's going to have tons of eggs. We're going to have tons of choice. Guess what? We didn't have a ton of choice. We ended up with one single embryo, just
What?
one. Yeah, just the egg extract. She didn't produce a lot of eggs that they had hoped. And of the eggs that, yeah, we just had one embryo. And I remember so clearly sitting in the doctor's office, and he's so wonderful. But at that time, obviously, I thought he wasn't, because you're vulnerable, right? And this process is it's a privatized, private medical care system. So you think they just care about the dollars. And I remember him sitting there and saying to us, telling us that there's one embryo. It looks very good, based on all the analysis that I've done. It's a good embryo, but there is only one. And so, I immediately in my mind thought, okay, this is, well, Tamara's going to do it because she has a successful pregnancy. We know it's worked in her body, so we'll go with that. And he looked at us and he said, because he knew how long I'd been trying. And he said, this embryo can go in either of your bodies. The success rates may not differ at all. And so, because they had done like my uterine testing and whatnot. So
Then
so
you,
that's what he said. And she sat there and she was incredible. And she said, you do this. And, but I don't want you to do this. And if it doesn't work, for you to carry that with you.
mm.
And, sorry, I'm going to get emotional here.
I know, I'm tearing up too.
It was amazing because it was selfless of her in recognizing how much I wanted this. Um, and I was like, okay, all right, yes, okay. If it's a loss, it's not my fault. If it's a loss, and let's do this. And but what we did was we took this little one embryo and we froze it for 7 months because we were like, we're gonna go on vacation, we're gonna figure stuff out. And so we went to Italy, had the best vacation for 3 weeks, took our son, he was 3.5 at the time. And then and I wanted some time. I didn't feel ready yet
Yeah,
to,
didn't want to be rushed into this when you were
yeah,
super, yeah.
yeah. And so we came back. It was then January of 2019. And we're like, all right, let's do it. We played some music in I actually I had a dream the night before of one of the doctors, and not even the doctor that I was working with, doing the transfer of the embryo. And then she ended up being the one who transferred the embryo, which was
No way.
really weird. Yeah. But we played music and we laughed a lot. Like I remember we were so relaxed that day. And then we just hoped and prayed that it would work. And then so you wait, I think the wait period is 6 days, because 6 to 8 days, I can't remember, but it's shorter than your regular wait of 2 weeks, because this blastocyst is already 5 to 6
More
days old.
developed. Yeah.
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 And so I remember the blood work should have been on the weekend, but because the blood labs are closed, I would have to go in on the Monday for the blood work to find out if I was pregnant. But of course, I started taking home pregnancy tests, because who doesn't, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I took pregnancy tests throughout the years. I always took them.
Yeah.
And so, they'd always be negative. And then this time there was a faint positive line. And I remember being like, holy shit, it's happened. And I honestly, I knew it had happened, because there was just this feeling that was so different from all the other times. And I was just like, I think this is real. And I looked, and I remember sending a picture to Tamara, and she's like, this is great, babe, but like, let's just wait
Let's
till the
wait.
blood.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember sending it to my friends, and I was like, it like, do you see what I see? And they're
Yeah.
like, oh my God. Everyone, we're all super ecstatic. And I sent it to one of my dearest, closest friends. He passed away in 2019. But he was a big part of this process too, in terms of at work, someone who, like, he was amazing, very, very just supportive. And he was also the real talk in my head. He was like, this is amazing, but you just be realistic. If this is blah blah blah, right? Like, just everything of like, just let's wait for the blood work until we can really celebrate.
Yeah.
And then blood work comes, it's she says it's positive. I'm like, yeah, I took some tests, I know.
You're like, I already knew.
Oh my gosh. And then the beauty of being through the fertility clinic is you get to go for ultrasounds at 7 weeks, and then you get to go, and then they sort of move you then into the regular system. So I got to
Okay.
see how this fetus was progressing, and hear the heartbeat. Like, when we went for that heartbeat, it was the most incredible feeling in the whole world. It was like, oh my God, my body is growing another human being. Like, holy crap. And then, okay, what are the odds that this is going to go wrong? Because there are more odds of it not developing to term than like, it's wild when you actually read about the development of fetuses. It's like, how does this happen? Like,
I know.
it's a
It's a true
miracle.
miracle that anyone is here. Like
Yeah.
I that's how I feel after going through like just pregnancies and learning more
Hmm.
about it. Um And I do one thing I wanted to say is that you were going through all of this stuff while also being a parent to a young
Yes.
child,
Yes.
which is incredibly hard. Being a parent to a young
Yes.
child is hard in itself, and if you are going through a lot of I feel like it probably affected every aspect of your life and your health.
Everything, everything. I was unhappy. I was very depressed. I was seeing an amazing therapist who actually dealt with a lot of people dealing with infertility. She was incredible. My boss at the time, Matt, who passed away, he was so supportive too. He said I needed to take a leave of absence. And I was so distant from my kid, from my wife. Like I was so broken. I was so broken, right? And it was just, I didn't feel like I knew who I was anymore. And how I like, what do I do? How do I go on? This is something I really want. And why isn't it happening to me? And it just, but you know what? I had an incredible support network. I met some wonderful friends through this. And you know, they were incredible through the whole process. So yeah, you know, I found people to lean on, which really got me through it.
And now
And actually, Rena, who's been on your podcast, was one of
yes.
those humans.
And I mean, Rena is incredible, so I figured her people
Yeah.
are also incredible. Um, but that I think anyone who has been through any period of depression knows that what you feel during that time is very dark and it can
Mhm.
be very lonely, but it's not the real you in the
Yeah.
sense that that's not who you are. You're not defined by, what you're going through at any given period of your life, right?
Yeah.
And I think that people who love you obviously recognize you for you, even when maybe you couldn't recognize yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's truly special about relationships and connection and community is we need it. It's essential for every single person
Yeah.
to be here and to be thriving. And
Yeah.
I feel like we lost so much of that during the pandemic, but you had your daughter, I believe,
Yeah, right before the
right
pandemic.
before the pandemic.
Right before. Yeah.
Okay.
And I had
Oh,
all these hopes and dreams of what we were gonna do during my parental leave, but that didn't pan out in the same way. Yeah, and you know, pregnancy was amazing. I know you asked me how I felt, and I
yeah.
was ecstatic. Ecstatic through all of it. Except when I realized my body was changing and my chest was growing. Now I haven't I've generally been on the smaller side. You know, I gained weight, so you know, my chest got
Everything grew.
bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then but it started growing during pregnancy. And the one thing was I had made it clear because I have as a you know, as a person who identifies as non-binary, I really hate my chest. I don't connect with it. You know, even from an intimate perspective, I don't want anyone touching my chest. It's just not an area that I've ever connected with intimately, or even outwardly. And so I made it clear to the midwife right from the beginning
Yeah.
that I wasn't going to be, you know, chest or breastfeeding. And she was amazing, incredibly supportive. Great. Yep. Okay, I got you. Don't worry. I will take care of it. Um, which was great. But, you know, I needed to then find clothing that I felt comfortable in. And
Yeah.
I've always felt really comfortable in expressing my gender through my clothing.
Yeah.
And, you know, I say this in my keynote, but my mom was extremely supportive in that regard. As conservative, she's a conservative Muslim human being. But she was the most supportive parent in allowing me to express myself the way that felt right for me. And I hope I can do that for my kids. But she was incredible. But she you know blames herself for making me gay because she let me wear my brother's tuxedo when I was sick. He's convinced that that's the moment that it
That's
happened.
the moment it
You know
happened.
what? Maybe as a parent, she might have seen the joy I felt.
Yeah.
So maybe in her mind, you know, as I sort of break this down, maybe in her head, she actually did see it. And she saw the joy that I felt putting on my brother's suit. And so that's why she thinks that's what made me gay, is allowing me to express myself.
But in
But it's
reality, it was just you for the first time feeling like
safe.
this is me.
And
Yeah.
me. Yeah, exactly. Right. And having a parent who allowed me to do that. And the thing is, like, I grew up in a community where we did performances like dances every like December and July or whatever. And so my cousin was the girl dancer, and I always took on the boy role, right? Because we were acting out Bollywood, so we would do all the Bollywood
I love
things,
it.
and I was always the boy. And even in so I'm a smiley, so even in the Khane, which is a mosque, we would perform these things on stage, and everyone knew I just played the boy role, and it was amazing. And I think that was so instrumental in who I became as an adult, in how confident I became in my identity. But in pregnancy, for the first time, I found myself so conflicted, because here's all this clothing that doesn't feel right for my repertoire of clothing, right? It's all frilly and frumpy, and I think
Flowery
any
and
person
yeah.
who goes through this, right? Like, you look at your options and you're like, these are not great options.
You're like,
And
none
then
of these are me. Yeah.
exactly, right? Because as you probably know, when you're going through it, your body is not even yours,
No,
right?
it's
Like, it's
not.
just it's a host to this parasite, essentially.
That is the best way of putting it. Literally, that you are hosting this parasite that is growing in you that you want, but also you have zero control over your body at that time.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And so going through the process, I was feeling very disassociated with my gender identity. I didn't know how to express myself anymore, because clothing was my way to express my gender. And now I didn't have that option, because pregnancy was extremely limiting in my options for clothing. And so I found myself, and even t-shirts, right? They were all v-neck t-shirts. And here I am. Typically, actually, this is always buttoned up to my neck. So I always have my dress shirts buttoned up to my neck. I wear crew neck t-shirts. Like, I never wear v-neck t-shirts. And now that's all I was wearing, v-neck t-shirts with like cleavage showing, and everything was tight, which was fine. I don't mind wearing like skinnies, but apparently they're not in style anymore. I'm keeping all my skinnies, but I was wearing skinnies and these t-shirts, and I just didn't feel good. I didn't feel good with my body growing, and I felt conflicted. And Tamara helped me find clothing that fit. I had to import some from the UK, because here we didn't have many options. Just even t-shirts, I couldn't even find just general pregnancy t-shirts with like that were crew neck. And so I ended up finding some. I made it through, and then I ended up having a C-section as well. And the that whole experience of birthing was unreal. There were so many things that I was like, holy shit, this is what people have to go through. Like, it is unreal. But what's incredible is that both of us have been able to experience that in a relationship. And I know so many men in my life who have said to me, like, that's really incredible that you also got to experience it, because you typically
You
two
both.
people
Yeah.
don't, right, get to experience that. So I am very fortunate that I did get to experience it, even with 7 epidurals and lots of hands up my vagina. It was it was a great experience.
I feel like you have so much more gratitude for that experience because of your history going into that experience versus somebody who maybe got pregnant like that, ended up with a C-section, who may have found that experience more traumatizing because, and it's all that's I think that's why it's all, perspective matters. Um and with if both partners in a relationship experience that, I'm just thinking the deeper level of understanding and compassion and empathy and gratitude that you probably have when you're like, I've been through this as well. And
Yeah.
I know how hard it is. Because part of it is I felt it was so unfair after I had my baby that it was my body going through all of these changes and my body that needs to recover. Like, I'm a physio, so I know I support people through this because of that, because I know in many ways it is unfair. But
Yeah.
I also know that the partner doesn't want to always just be a useless, sitting in the background. They also want to help. And I
Yeah.
feel, yeah, this is incredible. I'm so happy that this is how it happened, even though I
Yeah.
know you had so many years of hardship going through it all.
But one thing I didn't point out was, while it's amazing, there was also, we went through the midwifery experience, and we ended up having the same midwife that we had when Tamara was pregnant,
No
which was
way.
amazing. She's incredible. But there was also an assumption that because my wife went through it, we knew what to expect. And
And you're like, nope, this is all new for me. Yeah.
that's the thing, right? And that
And your
made me
body's
upset.
different.
That's what it was. And it made me quite upset through the process, because there were questions I would have, because there were changes that were happening to my body, not because we'd already gone through pregnancy, or Tamara had gone through pregnancy and we know what to expect, but that, I'm still a different human being. Like I still have different like thoughts, and have questions. And so there was that underlying assumption, because we'd gone through it. It was like she was seeing the same person again, but it
Mm.
wasn't the same person. It was an entirely different human being. So that's something that I think, while yes, amazing that we both got to experience it, we were both also seen as one through the experience, which, it wasn't the same. Like, yes, we both ended up having a C-section, but my post experience was extremely, extremely different than hers.
And what was you had mentioned that you'd had postpartum preeclampsia.
Yes,
Can you tell
yeah.
me what that is and
Yeah, and
how that came
I
about?
want the world to know about this, and just look for these symptoms. So, I was 3, 4 days out from giving birth. We had come home very fairly quickly. We didn't want to stay in the hospital. Um, Everything checked out fine, and so about 3 days in, I started swelling up a lot. My feet were swelling up, my hands were swelling up, and typically swelling is supposed to go down. And that's what they tell you to, right? When you leave the hospital, your swelling is supposed to come down. The secondary midwife had come to check on me, and they checked my blood pressure, they checked things, and I was starting to have trouble breathing, especially when I was lying down. I was having trouble breathing, and so my midwife, bless them, thought it was anxiety, and so gave me these tips and tools on how to breathe. And I was like, okay, all right, yeah, okay, maybe it is anxiety, I'll chalk it up to that. Thursday night comes, I'm having lots of trouble breathing when I'm on my back, like, ignoring it. I'm feeling like my feet, I can feel the liquid in my feet as I'm walking, like they're feeling really heavy, you know? And that was the Thursday. And I had said that, and they said, just keep doing the breathing exercises. You're probably fine. So Thursday night, I go to bed and I wake up like I can't breathe. I can't breathe at all in the laying position. Like I just can't catch breath. And so then I said to Tamara, I said, no, something is really wrong here. Like
This
something
is
is
not
wrong.
normal. Yeah.
Yeah. And I knew it. I knew I was like, and that's what I actually said. Those are the words. I said, this is not normal. Something is wrong. So she's like, all right, let's call the ambulance. Because it was 3 a.m. We have a brand new baby right next to us in the bassinet. And then our son, who's 4.5, sleeping in the other room. And so she can't leave. She can't take me to the hospital. So we're like, okay, let's call the ambulance. Ambulance is there. It's like 3:30 in the morning. They arrive and do all the work. They like everything looks fine. One of the paramedics, or one of the maybe it was the fire. Yeah, the fire, no, what are they called? Firefighters.
Firefighters.
Sorry. Yeah, I
You're
was
like
trying to
fire chief. Yeah. Firefighters. Yeah.
firefighters. She was telling me about her birth experience, and yeah, it can be hard, and everyone's kind of dismissing that I'm actually legitimately feeling something wrong with my body. And so they're like, well, because we're here and it's protocol, we have to take you to the hospital. I was like, okay. So I'm in this ambulance by myself. I'm getting very emotional. And then I'm like, maybe it is anxiety. Is it anxiety? Because every time I'd lie down, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't breathe at all.
I
And then
feel
he
like
was like,
that's a clear sign that that's not anxiety because
and
it's
he
like
kept saying,
mostly
yeah,
when
you
you're
know
lying
what?
down.
Yeah, he's like, yeah, no, it could be anxiety. And the thing is, they checked, my pulse and my heart rate, and everything seemed to be fine. I go to the hospital. I explain, they finally take me to triage. The paramedics just casually explain, yeah, she's having some trouble breathing and just recently had a baby. And here I am in the stretcher. I just had a C-section 7 days ago. And I'm like yelling that I had major surgery 7 days ago and something doesn't feel right. They're like, okay, okay. Eventually I get moved in to a room, and I go and ask, not a room, sorry, in the waiting area for patients that have been triaged now, but it's
Yes.
inside. And they go, okay, go and sit down over there. And then I go back to the counter and I ask, how many people are ahead of me? And they said 17.
What?
Yeah, and this was 3:30 in the morning in September of 2019. So this was before the pandemic. There
Wow.
were there were that 17
In
people
the middle of
ahead
the
of me
night.
in the middle of the night to be treated at the hospital. And I lost my shit. I was like, I just had a C-section and you're asking me to sit in a chair. Is there a room No, sorry. First I asked, is there a room available? They're like, no, no, sorry, we have no rooms. Then I got really upset. I got very emotional and I said, I just had a C-section. Like I cannot sit on a chair. All of a sudden, miraculously, right in front of the nurse's station, they open and it's an empty bed. And I was like, oh, okay. So they let me go in that. And I had during that time in the hospital, one of the nurses said, oh, you must have the baby blues. And I was like, no, I don't have the baby blues. Something is wrong with me. And then actually, a nurse, a South Asian nurse, actually heard me, so came over to me, and she's like, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Can I have some water?" She asked me what's going on. She's like, "Okay, let me see if I can get you seen faster." She gets me moved to the another area where I was seen, and they went in, got my X-rays done, not X-rays, but a CT scan
Yeah.
of my lungs and my heart to see what's going on. I had 5 liters of fluid built up on my lungs and I had heart failure.
Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
5 liters and heart failure.
Mm-hmm.
And is this a complication of a C-section or is
No,
this
it's just a complication of pregnancy that
a
and it's very
pregnancy?
rare.
Okay.
And my blood pressure had skyrocketed. And so they didn't know what was going on because this is so rare. They had no idea, right? The doctor came and he was like, yeah, you have liters and liters of fluid on your lungs. And so, gave me diuretics and I just kept peeing out. It was great weight loss. Right?
You're like, I'm instantaneously 15
five
pounds
pounds.
less.
Yeah, it was 5 pounds lighter. I went in and came out. Um, but they admitted me into the cardiac ICU, essentially for three days. I was there for 2 nights, 3 days, getting
Wow.
shots to make sure I don't have a clot and I don't die, constant heart monitoring. And yeah, they came in and said, yeah, I had mild congestive heart failure. And here I am, 37, just gave birth, and you're sitting here telling me I have mild congestive heart failure. I've never had heart issues in my life. And then on top of that, I was told I could never carry again because it's too high of a risk. And this sort of stuff, like the thing is, like, I had to keep telling people something was wrong. No one listened to me. Like my midwives who were incredible, and they apologized after the fact. I think it was a really good learning experience for them because they realized, okay, when we know a patient is talking about not being able to breathe, like these signs and symptoms, like, if you're experiencing swelling that's going up, if your blood pressure is up, and this can happen up to 6 weeks postpartum, blood pressure, swelling, and breathing. Those are three things you got to pay attention to because you can end up having a stroke and dying.
Mm.
And it's because your body goes through so much, right? We all know the impact of pregnancy and childbirth on a body, but it's the recovery isn't easy on the body either, right? So much can go wrong, and this is rare. But there are signs and symptoms, and the thing is, the healthcare practitioners are not. They don't know.
They don't know.
Um,
Yeah.
as a person who's had a baby, they're extremely dismissive. They think you're hormonal. They think that maybe you don't want to be with your baby. I don't know what they think, but they didn't take me seriously at all. It was so much advocating at 3:30 in the morning while
When
being
you're a
unable
week
to breathe.
postpartum, post
Yeah,
C-section, when you're
exactly.
already like, I'm exhausted, I'm barely sleeping, and I just want to sleep. Like, why would you? That's what I want to know. Like, what is in their mind to think that somebody wants to be at the hospital, first of all,
Yeah,
when they're a week postpartum and they would rather be sleeping in their own bed? Like, even if their
absolutely.
baby's crying, it's their own space
Yeah,
versus like, and I do see a lot of postpartum folks, pregnant folks being dismissed
yeah,
for their concerns. And I really do think that we know our bodies best. Like you joked earlier, like you're not the doctor, but at the same time, I really do think that we have an innate ability to know our bodies best. Just
Yeah.
like babies, they know they're hungry, they will cry. They don't need to be
Yes.
told that they're hungry. They just know. We
Yeah.
know when something's not right. And I do think that we need to listen. So high blood pressure, increasing swelling, difficulty breathing. Did you when you went into so it took a CT, that was the diagnosis
Yeah.
that helped?
Then
Okay.
they saw the liters of fluid
The
on the blood.
fluid.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. And
God.
it was terrifying. It was so terrifying. And I remember calling my circle of friends, and they showed up right away because they all live near the hospital. And they were there from the morning all throughout, came back for dinner. My mom stayed. So it was incredible. I had this incredible support system. My wife had her family at home with the baby, but like I couldn't see the baby. And I had just like given birth to this kid, right? And it's just like I couldn't see her. It was it was hard. I think what was hardest was also like thinking I was gonna die, and no one would believe me. That was the hardest. Was no one believed me. No one who has gone through the medical profession is believing me as a patient. They just and it's absurd because you add on intersectional identities and it just gets worse, right?
I always think, I'm like, if you are a white woman, how would that have changed?
Oh,
If you were,
absolutely.
if you were
Absolutely.
hetero, like if the way you presented was different, like there's so many layers to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we know that this happens in the States. There's research too. They
Yes, there
research
is.
this. In Canada, I don't know if there's race-based data and database like
Not as much. I
research
like we
coming out of
know
this.
how many Black women die in childbirth and postpartum because their needs are not taken care of. They're not heard. And it happens. And I saw it too in the hospital. I remember being there, and this guy had come in, you know, he had come in drunk, and like the number of people who would attend to his needs constantly versus mine. And I was like, what? I don't understand. Like, I just had major surgery. I cannot breathe. And I'm told I have the baby blues and then left to just go sit in a chair. Whereas this guy's given a room with a bed and like told to just recover and go home. And it's like,
You're like, he
are you,
literally just got drunk. He just needs an
yeah,
IV. He can sit. He'll be fine.
yeah, yeah. But like you see it day in and day out, like the system is so broken, right? And I mean textbooks, just think about textbooks, right? They don't even have racial like different
No,
color skin
no,
tones.
everything is white. And I think that, and the other thing is, even as like I'm a brown woman, I'm a South Asian
Yeah.
woman, and I also studied from a white lens. Even though I'm not white, I have life experience that isn't white, but the way I studied in school was very what's a normal posture?
Yeah.
It's not a brown woman's posture. It is a
Yeah.
white male posture that we're studying as normal. And that's so
Yeah.
unrealistic. It's very easy when you work in healthcare to be very mistrusting of healthcare professionals because you
Yeah.
see exactly who works there and their biases. And I've worked in the hospital system before too. And unfortunately, it happens more often than not. And I know we all like to have like blind trust in our healthcare professionals, but here's why self advocating is so crucial. And I'm so glad that you had it in you to advocate for yourself, because some people are so scared to speak up, scared to say anything, and they don't want to be a bother.
Yeah,
And
that's what it
that
is.
may have killed you, right?
Yeah,
Like,
no, and that's exactly what it is. The don't want to be a bother. I think that is so common in how women are told to behave, right? Like, don't bother people. And like you said, it could mean your life.
could mean
Like,
your life.
and the thing is, like, especially if you've gone through childbirth, if you're feeling that anything is feeling off, just go get it checked. And if it's not, if everything's fine, great. But you didn't bother anyone by getting it checked. What
Yeah.
you did was ensuring that you will continue to live to then take care of this child that you just delivered and gave birth to. And it's just like, you have to listen to your body, and you have to advocate in the healthcare system, because no one else is going to do it for you. In fact, they're going to tell you you're wrong, and they're going to tell you, no, you're fine. And you just have to keep going. You have to listen to yourself and fight those systems, because those systems weren't designed for people like you and me.
And it's a very patriarchal system that I know better.
Absolutely.
I'm right. You're less than me. So I'm going to tell you what to do about your own body. And it's like, no, like this is still my body. I own myself. You are just helping me. That's your
Yeah.
job. And in my line of work, I really try to remove that, because even women carry the patriarchy onto our patients. We have this hierarchy, and I'm like, no, nobody's better or worse. And I'm like, my clients, they know their body's the best. So if they're telling me something's wrong, I'm listening.
Yeah.
And I really encourage anyone who's listening to this, especially if you are in the healthcare system or if you are a pregnant person or postpartum, please advocate for yourself. Even if your doctor hates you, I don't want to be liked. I want to be alive and well, right?
That's it, right? Yeah. You got to advocate for your life, because literally the system is not designed for you.
And until it
Especially,
is, until
yeah.
it is, we'll be having to continue this, advocacy and speaking up. And I think that's something that I got from your talk for Steps of Pride as well, is like, there's so many layers of you not being seen for who you are ultimately,
Yeah.
that is very damaging to a person. And as an
Absolutely.
immigrant, I feel that,
Yep.
is people are seeing me as this, kid with an accent who smells like curry, right? Versus like, okay, that might be true, but also I'm this, and this.
Yeah.
And it's very damaging when you get it a lot. And somebody who's never had it would be like, "Oh, so what? Just correct them." And you're like, "No, it's not just that
It's
simple. It's
No,
not that easy."
unfortunately, it's not, right? It's just not. And like, yeah, no, I think you got that all.
I want to know about you as a parent. How do
Yeah.
you not how do you raise your kids, but how do you ensure that your kids are best equipped with inclusive language, inclusive I think just being raised by you would be, you know, would be easy enough, but even
Yeah.
still, for somebody like I'm in a heterosexual relationship,
Yeah.
and we talk to our kids about all different ways of being families, but what I notice is that their daycare doesn't. So
Hmm.
while they might mention it once or twice, there's still a mommy daddy or like a two parents. And I'm like, some people don't have parents. They were
Yeah.
raised by grandparents or other members of the family. And I know it's going to happen when there's one kid that then enters. And I'm like, we shouldn't have to wait till we meet that kid. It should be the default,
That's
you
it.
know?
That's it. Yeah, and so what I'm really conscious about with my kids is, at first I'm completely honest and transparent with them. I don't hide anything. And also, I think what's really important and what people don't recognize is kids can understand a lot. If you say it to them in kid appropriate terms, they're so good, and they're sponges, right? They're going to absorb this information, and they're going to spread this information, and they're going to be like, they're just wonderful when you actually empower them with information. So this morning is a great example, because one of them was saying something about ladies. I don't know, they kept using the term ladies. And I was like, I don't really like that term. I actually really hate, like, in terms of reference to me, I cannot stand the term lady. Um, I actually I'm much more closer to changing my pronouns altogether. Like right now I'm she, they, but I think I might move to they. I'm becoming more comfortable with that. Um, but I said to my son, who's older, I said, well, why don't I like the term lady? He's like, because you're non-binary. And I'm like, what does that mean? And he's like, well, you don't really feel like a boy and you don't feel like a girl. I was like, exactly. And and then my daughter, she's like, ask me. And I was like, well, how do you feel? She's like, I don't feel like a boy, I don't feel like a girl, I'm just Gabrielle. And she's 3, right? And I'm like, yeah, you do you, like, you be confident in who you are. And I think what's really important for me, and I think for other parents, is instill the confidence in your children to express themselves as who they are, support them as who they are, but also teach them to support their peers. Um, and then advocate in all the systems possible. So, like you said, at your daycare, right? Like, our daycare celebrates Pride, celebrates National Indigenous History Month, celebrates Black History Month, recognizes diversity. I think it's super important. But Here's a really good example of how you can change things so easily. If you are a new parent that's applying to a daycare, for example, going on a wait list, there's always a form. The form usually says the mother's name. So it says mother and then it says father, right? Now, inclusive daycares and, childcare provider places will have parent one, parent two, or, guardian one, guardian two. Um, and I think when you see a form that says mother and father, I think it's really important for you to fill that out and potentially cross out the word father, cross out the word mother, and just write parent one and parent two. And I know a lot of people get their arms up as like, oh, I'm not being seen as a mother anymore. There's the whole turf piece, and like there's so much, that people feel like are being taken away. But it's not a sum zero game. Like it's not a like it's not nothing's being taken away. What you've done now is made it easier for a family like mine to enter this space,
Yeah.
because what you've done is made it safe. So when I go to apply for my child for daycare and I get this form and it says parent one and parent two, I'm like, oh my God, look, we're being seen. Our family structure is being
Our
seen.
family will feel safe here. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And the thing is, there was a Montessori close by to us. We were looking at different places, I did the same thing. I sent the form in and I did that. And I said, have you not had, families of different structures? And she was honest. She's like, you know what? No, we haven't. And you're the first one to correct me on this. And I appreciate it. And it's also the responsibility of the childcare providers in the same breath to be like, thanks for this. And then just change it going forward. And that's it. And
Because if they don't, if how they respond, it also is very telling on what their status is in terms of their level of embracing people who are
yeah,
not like them. Right.
yeah, exactly.
And I had a recent, I had signed up for this pelvic health class course, and the form, they're like archaic. It's all in, like, you got to fill it out PDF. I'm like, there's no online registration. Like, what? We're in 2022. But anyways, and it said, um, are you a female or a male? Or no, what's your gender? And then it says female, male,
Yeah,
and said,
that's not gender.
yeah. And then it said, are you willing to pair with somebody of the opposite gender or opposite sex or something?
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, but then that's assuming that there's a gender binary. And also, what question are you asking here? What are you trying to figure out?
That's
Because
what
the
it is,
question
right? Like,
should
what do
be,
you want to
you
know?
have a vulva or a penis, right? And are you willing to pair with somebody with a vulva or penis? Just leave it open, because it's just so unnecessary.
Yeah.
And I emailed back and I said that to them. I said, this is better language. And I'm like, I'm not the expert on this, but this is what I think needs to happen. And the response I got was, oh yeah, we're aware. We're going to change it sometime in 2023 when we have an online registration system. And I'm like, this takes 2 seconds on Microsoft Word. I'm like, you have a Microsoft Word document online. I will change it for you. But like, and I'm like, but why is this so hard? Cause I'm like, you know what I would see if I was non-binary and I was signing up for this course? I would not sign up.
Yeah.
I would say,
And
this
that's, you know
course is
what?
not for me.
That happens to me all the time. When I'm filling out forms, I think what makes me so angry is are you male, female, or other? No, I'm sorry. I'm not an other. I'm still a human being. And also, what's so important is to distinguish the difference between sex and gender. And then also, what do you actually want to know? Do you
Yeah.
want to know what's in between my legs? And what was assigned at birth, or do you want to know what is my gender identity? Those two can be completely different, right? Do you want to know if I'm cisgendered or if I'm, non-binary or trans? Like, what are you getting at, and why do you want this
And
information?
that's the why. And because a lot of the times it's unnecessary info. For example, I was at this conference and I was just thinking about this. And I was like, one of my friends who's transgender said, he, they, and none of us had written down our pronouns. And
Yeah.
that was like the first day. And I was like, oh my gosh, we should all be writing down our pronouns. And then somebody else brought up a great point, and she's like, but why are we defined by our pronouns at the same time? Because, like, shouldn't we all just treat each other as human beings? Because
Yeah.
we were also in a very inclusive space. And I'm like, that's a really great point. We were out for lunch at the time, and the server, who's like 20, was like, hey girls. And I'm like, excuse me. And my
Yeah.
friend said, we're not girls. And he's like,
Yeah.
oh, hey ladies. And we're like, That's
Ugh,
not any better, because you cannot assume that because we all are sitting and we may look like ladies that we all want to be called ladies. I am a woman. I don't want to be called ladies because I feel like it's also very,
that's
it's
yeah,
like,
I hate that term. I hate
yeah,
it so
hey ladies.
much.
And I'm like, can you not just not, like
Just say hey.
just say, hey.
Just say hey. Like that's it. It doesn't need any more than that.
Yeah. And I think some people are very unwilling to change that because that's all they've known is one way.
Yeah.
And I think we'll get there. I
Yeah.
know that there's more of us changing and not even changing, but like um accepting more inclusive language, more inclusive practices. Like, for example, there's a holiday called Rocky. I don't know if you know Rocky.
Yeah, I know
Yeah.
Rocky. Where
Yeah.
you tie your brother and sister, like it's
Yeah,
between a
the
brother.
sister ties a thread on the brother's wrist, and the
Yeah.
brother then gives the sister a gift or money. And it's
Yeah.
very like, okay, but what if you don't have two siblings of like a boy and a girl?
Yeah.
Or what if it's like, who cares? Right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so over the years, I'm just like, all right, we'll honor our day together as siblings, but like it doesn't have to be this big like patriarchal thing either.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some people are so sensitive about, oh, that's our tradition. I'm like, yes, and you
Yeah.
can celebrate it and you can make it a bit better.
But that's yeah, and those types of traditions can and should be changed because if we think back to any of these types of traditions, it also feeds into the toxic male culture, right? Like in that scenario, the brother is meant to protect the sister. But does he have to be the protector? Why can't she be the protector? Why is
Especially in
all that
scenarios
pressure?
when what if the sister's the older one too, right? It's like
Absolutely. But why is all the pressure on men to be the stronger, physically stronger, the protectors? Like they're not allowed to be emotional human beings. Like they're just seen as these protectors who have to go and work and do certain things while these women rear and need protection. We're fragile, women are
fragile
fragile
being. Yeah.
beings that need protection. It's like
And you're like, dude,
you
we
give
like
birth.
we
It's
grow
so
babies. We're like
yeah,
we are like the least fragile of people. But
yeah,
yes, I agree. I loved this conversation. And I feel like we hit on so many important themes of acceptance and seeing people for who they are. And I always think it's better to ask if you don't know than
yeah,
assume. Um, and even with, I'm just thinking about my own practices, like, how can I make it better? Because it's not about feeling ashamed or like, oh, I screwed up. It's about then do better. Right.
exactly.
And I think we all help, like your midwives, like the nurses who were in the hospital that night, they could all do better
Yeah,
because they
absolutely.
met you and
Yeah,
they hopefully learned from that experience to
yeah.
not dismiss, people who are coming in with these very real life threatening concerns.
And that's what it is, right? Like I think the biggest piece is like you get this information and you do something with it, right?
Yeah.
Like that you absorb it and then you make change. And I think the only way to evolve is to actually change and to listen to what needs to be done. And for me and for my family structure, I rely heavily on allyship. And allyship isn't just sitting next to me and be like, yeah, great, I come to Pride. No, it's actually when you see those forms, you demand change for those forms. When you see anything happening in your school systems, you see any form of homophobia showing up, you hear your kid saying anything, you intervene. You make a point to make sure that your kid isn't the bully on that playground, who's making my kid feel the way they feel, maybe because they have a different family structure. But it's not just my family structure, right? It's any family
So
structure that
many,
is different from the quote unquote typical or normal.
even parents with or single parent families probably feel that
Absolutely.
pressure too, that there's
Yeah.
this assumption that you must have the father or
Another
the mother
parent.
or the
Yeah.
another parent.
Yeah.
um and I
And
also
then
think it's
imagine
important.
just sorry, imagine just being that child who constantly has to correct people. Like, no, I have a mom. No, I have two moms. No, I like
Yeah,
it's exhausting for the kid as
that's
well,
it.
right? And
Yeah.
like as adults, we don't like being asked the same question over and over again. So why are we going to do it to our kids?
And I think it also wears down on them or becomes more of their identity than it
Yeah,
needs to be. Like your
exactly.
identity, like I often think my identity doesn't have to be the things that make me different, but it has become that because of how many times it's been pointed out,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
identity could be something else. Maybe I'm an artist or maybe I'm, something else, but it has become all of the things that have made me different. And luckily I'm at the point where I'm embracing that. For the
Yeah.
longest time, I pushed that away.
Yeah.
And as kids, we can't expect them to withstand the traumas, the micro trauma, the macro traumas of all of these questions asked nonstop.
Yeah.
We need to do better for our kids so that they can also do better for their peers and themselves.
Yeah.
So thank you for bringing that up. I have some final questions for you that are
Okay.
about you. We've talked about you, but these are more about you,
Yeah.
because I want to know everything there is to know about Sophia. Okay,
Okay.
what's a book or podcast that has been life changing for you?
I will say the most memorable and definitely life-changing was 1619. It's a New York Times podcast by Nicole Hannah Jones, who is I want to say a journalist, I think for New York Times, who basically talks through enslavement of Africans of coming to the US and how that shaped what became America, but the history and the way she tells the stories are incredible. I've never been so captivated by a podcast and by I've never been so moved by it as well, and so moved to do more,
Mhm.
um, because she gives you so much truth in such in a way that's just like, holy whoa, I didn't know all of this happened historically. And it's very powerful, and I encourage anyone who has time to listen to it. It's really, really well done.
Thank you. I've never heard of that, so I'll put it on my list because
Yeah.
I do love I love listening to and reading things like that are factual, but also based on like things that affect us still now, right?
Yeah, and her voice, oh, she has such an incredible podcast voice. Like, I could listen to her story tell all the time.
Nice.
Mhm.
So what are three things that you like to do for yourself every day?
Yeah, this is a hard one. I mean, make my morning coffee. Need it. I like putting on my robe at the end of the day. Like, like after my shower, I switch into my robe. I just love it. I don't know why, but I just do. And it's this robe that I've had since university. So like 20 years. It's a fleece robe.
I'm picturing something kind of cozy, but a little ratty still.
Yeah,
It's been
that's
around for
basically
so
it.
long. Yeah.
So long, and I can't get rid of it. I've gotten other ones, but I don't. And I think those are just the two things I think that are really part of my practice and routine.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think we all have our rituals or things we do that kind of bring us comfort, make us feel better.
Yeah.
And it's nice to, I think, be intentional about it so that, I mean, your coffee, you're not going to skip out on, but maybe
Yeah.
if you're having a rough day, you're like, oh, that's something that I could do.
Yeah.
And we all have that. So I always like learning about that. So what are you really passionate about right now?
Yeah, I'm super passionate about breaking down systems. Like I am really like I think for my kids, for all kids growing up right now, right? The systems that we've grown up in, I don't want them to grow up in those systems, right? Like the barriers that exist, I want to break those all down. And so that's why, from a career perspective, I've been doing this work for this as in diversity, equity, and inclusion work for about six years formally, but about 10 years informally, is really just to continue to advocate for change, advocate for equity deserving groups, so that I can run myself out of a job. Like my whole vision is that I don't have this job anymore, and no one does. Like it doesn't exist because it's just interwoven, and that people who everyone has an equitable chance to succeed.
And I think that kind of brings me to my next question is if you could change one thing about the world, what would it be?
That's it right
That,
there.
yeah.
That if I no, you know what? I'm gonna change that. I mean, it is part of that, but I think one of the biggest pieces is in healthcare. And I think because of my personal experiences, but I've seen so many countless racialized people go through this, is that racialized women, I will say, are seen as valued human beings in the healthcare system, that they are taken seriously, and that they matter in the system, that their lives matter. That's truly what I would want to see changed.
I want to see that change too.
Yeah,
We deserve it. Not even deserve. We are owed that
absolutely.
basic human
Absolutely.
privilege
Right.
of being
It's a
human.
human right,
It's a
right?
human right.
Yeah.
Um, and what do you think is your mom's strength?
I like to think that it's my ability to be open and transparent with my kids. And try to answer, like I try to unlearn a lot of what I've learned while raising my kids. Because my son the other day had asked me about what's overweight or something around weight. And I was like, okay, okay, this is my opportunity to do something different.
Yeah.
Because, my mom would have just answered, or my parents would have answered in any way that wouldn't be okay to say right now.
Yeah.
And whereas I was like, well, it's not about being overweight. It's about, I started talking about how, like, your organs or your insides feel good or don't feel so good. It doesn't matter the size of your body on the outside, it just matters how you're feeling on the inside. Like, are you feeling like, yeah, if you wanted to get up and run, could you do that? Or would you feel like not so great about, maybe you feel out of breath more than you want to. And so trying to explain that, because I also realized, like, my importance of raising a young man in society, and what do I want to impart on him, and how
Mhm.
do I want him to see women, see men, like see other people, just see other humans and treat other humans. And I don't want him to look at large bodies any differently from small bodies. And so it's like, so yeah, that's what it is really unlearning, and being conscious of that, and then just being open and transparent with my kids.
I can relate to so much of that.
Yeah.
I remember once I was changing and my mom pointed to my belly and said, "You're fat." And like the initial response probably that I would have had 10 years ago would have been like, "I'm not fat. Like, what are you talking about? This is just,
Yeah.
kind of a defensive approach." And I just said, "Yep, I have fat." And I
Yeah.
just moved on
Yeah.
because I don't want her to link the word fat or having fat as something that mommy gets upset about and that's a bad taboo thing.
Yeah.
And there are people, and we talk about it all the time. So there are people in larger bodies, there are people in smaller bodies. I had made this offhand comment about my son. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like, he doesn't even have a butt because he's so tiny. He's just a
Yeah.
thin kid. He was like I was as a kid, to be honest. We were the same frame, tiny. And then I heard her repeat, "Oh my God, he doesn't even have a butt," like literally in the same tone that I did. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, she got that from me." And she
Yeah.
said it yesterday. And I said, "Remember, we don't say that. We don't make judgments on other people's bodies." I'm like, "Remember, that was something that mommy said that wasn't right." And she's like, "I learned it from you." And I'm like, okay. Like one mistake and this is what happens. But it really forces you to be on your toes as a
Yeah.
parent because we want to do better for ourselves and our kids. So
But what I love in what you just said was also just acknowledging and telling our kids that we're not right.
yeah. Oh
Right?
yeah.
Because our parents never did that. Like,
Never.
when did we ever hear an apology at the end of the
Never.
night, right? Whereas I'm so focused on repair work, at the end of the night or wherever throughout the day, right? Repair, repair, repair. Like, oh, yeah, you know what? I messed up. Yeah, I yelled. I was having a really hard time. Like, really letting them in that I'm human. I have emotions. I might mess up, but I'm really trying really hard. And I'm sorry. And how can I make this better? And I think that's really important in raising kids.
I think so too. It leads to more empathetic kids, but also I think hopefully they'll feel more loved because
Yeah.
how nice would it have been to have an apology, right?
Oh my
Just when our
goodness,
parents,
right?
just an acknowledgement that they weren't right, that they hurt you, and that, it's repair is so important. And you have so many mom strengths. I can just see it now.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your time with me, with us, with the audience. We are all so grateful for your presence and for your insights and for sharing your story. Where can people connect with you?
Thank you for asking. And thanks so much for inviting me here today. I really, really appreciate it. It's been such a great conversation. And thank you for creating the space, for letting me be vulnerable and emotional. And it's been a great conversation. You can find me at on Instagram at sd.apper. It's supposed to be s dapper, but someone took
Mm.
that. So I had to
Put
put
the
a
dot in. Yeah.
period. Yeah, I had to
Yeah.
put a dot in. So it's SD, no. Yeah, sd.apper, APPER. Yeah, that's my Instagram handle.
Awesome. I'll share that with the show notes as well. So if people want to connect with you, they can. If you're listening and you enjoyed this podcast, please share it and tag us to let us know your thoughts. Share it with somebody who needs to hear it because there are people in your life who need to hear this. Probably everybody in your life, but really, if you're listening to this, you're like, oh, this person really would benefit from this conversation. Please share it with them. Thank
Yes,
you
please
so
do.
much. Thank you so much, and have a fantastic rest of your day.